Yeah.
Here
Yeah.
we go.
I'm feeling ready
On
for
the
a rest.
on the 2nd of July, here we are. We're just winding down our week, and this will be it for a while as
Yeah.
we catch our
Take
breath
a
a little
break.
bit. And you've been a busy man. I
Well,
might,
working in the garden,
yeah, and
my
getting up in the
cat dance
morning and
lessons.
saying, do I face west for the rest of the day or do I face south? And looking at yourself in the
Yeah.
mirror.
Yeah. And saying, boy, I'll tell you, look at those steamer
Yeah,
trunks.
yeah, yeah. That
Have you
oil
cracked your
ole.
skull lately?
No, I have not. Although the
No.
more I shave, I realize I've got this ridge, and I've got a skull. Of course, it's collapsing onto itself because there isn't much to hold it up inside. We all know that, but it's I got a bit of a kind of a there's a dip there.
A dip.
Yeah, there's a dip, so
I'm
speaking.
so tired, I'm going to leave that one lie.
Good.
Yeah. Just put it on the sofa and pick it up another time.
So a big thank you to Hydro-Quebec for not turning off the power. I called them this morning and they said,
Oh, God.
I said,
How
are you
many
going to turn
times
off
have
the
you been
power
on the
again
phone?
today? And they said, we don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, she said, well, let me check. I said, well, that would be nice if you could check. So she puts,
Really?
oh yeah. So she puts me on hold again, not being rude. It was just kind of well, we don't know. So she put me on hold for about 10 minutes and came back. She said, no, it's going to be transformer JZ47548CD that they're going to turn off. And that apparently is not yours. I said, thank you.
Ah, okay. Was there a reason for turning off your power?
Yes,
Don't be,
no. They're
There was a reason.
they're doing the limondage. They are cutting tree branches, of course, which must be done.
Right.
And
Maintenance.
it's not the contractor's fault. It's nobody else. But then Hydro, of course, and of course, I was on the line with Hydro yesterday, and they said, "Well, why didn't we call you?" There's a question for you. I said, "Why didn't you call me?" So we had a great bit discussion about that. We should have called you. I said, "Well, you didn't." My neighbor next door this morning was out in her bathrobe talking to one of the guys in an orange vest, yelling at him. And I said, it's not his fault. He's not the guy who does this. He's just cutting
And
trees.
these are the tree guys. These aren't hydro
No,
guys.
no.
Doing
Not
the
a
power. This is
single hydro
okay.
person to be seen. These are all subcontractors. They're just doing their job, so. And I got one guy now sitting on my front lawn in a lawn chair, watching his truck.
So they're still there?
They arrived at 7. They turned off the power across the street at 8, and they're going to be down till 3.
Did you go out and have a chat with them?
No. They just smiled and they waved, and I just said, "Hi, how are you?"
Sir, you can't be on your own front lawn without a hard hat. Sir, you can't. Oh, jeez. Oh, well. But,
Anyway.
it could be worse.
Oh, everything could be worse. Yes.
Everything could be worse.
Yeah.
But you still like to bitch and complain about
No.
it. Anyway.
If you're gonna give me the business, look me in the eye. Don't do it from behind. Don't do it from behind.
Okay, I think I can handle that.
Don't do it in my ear. Look me in the eye if you're gonna give me the old
and say we're gonna bugger up your life.
That's right. Yeah. Look me straight in the eye.
Which is not difficult to do.
And don't pretend that it's somebody else's fault. God. Anyway.
That's true. I blame Trump.
Let's get into that. Matthew Friedman is joining us this morning, and while we connect Matthew, I'm going to tell you that he's been living in the U.S. since 2005. He's a Montrealer.
Yeah.
He's lived in Boston. He's lived in New York. He's lived in Chicago. He has a PhD in history from Rutgers in New Jersey, where he teaches. He lectures at Rutgers Newark. He's taught journalism at Concordia. He's worked for the Gazette. He's worked from the CBC, which is where we know him from. And member of the NDP when he's in Canada. He supported Bernie Sanders. That kind of gives you an idea of where the politics are. And good morning,
Great,
Matthew. How are you?
Good morning. Not too bad.
I'm
doing well.
Going through your bio notes here, and I was attracted by a piece of Matthew's that I read not too long ago, and it was dated June 21st. I think The Unsinkable Donald Trump, which is on the TypeScript, which is what we call it, a news blog. Matthew, is that pretty well what it is?
I suppose an online magazine, something like that. I mean, who knows, right?
That's edited by Matthew, and it's worth a read. I'll put a link to it, and perhaps we can start there, Matthew, and because I'm very pleased to see that it sort of confirms what my little brain has been suggesting to myself and to others, that it's not about Trump, is it?
No, it isn't. And I think when we focus our energies and our criticism on Trump, I think we miss a very important point. And that is that he was elected president by 46% of voters in 2016.
Yeah.
And they haven't changed their minds since. And that's, I think, one of the things that I think one of the big takeaways that we have to have with, all of these scandals. This has probably been the most scandal-ridden presidency in U.S. history. And I say this as a historian. I mean, there have been many scandals, but there's one every 2 or 3 weeks now. And his, if you watch the polls, and I'm sure we all do, his polling remains steadily between 38 and 44% of Americans. And that suggests that they agree with this. And if they agree with this, it really doesn't matter, the figure of Trump himself doesn't really matter.
Well, what does that say about American culture in 2020 then,
There
Matthew?
you go. Yep.
Well, that's a frightening thing. I mean, I think we have to go sort of look at the longue durée here, in the sense that I think what we're seeing is the manifestation of dynamics within American culture and society that go back at least a generation. There's been a profound atomization in terms of American society and culture. The famous book Bowling Alone deals with this, sort of the collapse of associative sociality, if you will, the sense of community. But also there's been sort of this profound economic shift in America. And, for throughout American history, a segment of the American population, understood that America worked for them, and that is white people. And those are the people who find that all of a sudden it doesn't. There was a great article written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, years ago, who he was addressing the shooting. He was addressing that moment when Barack Obama stepped forward and said, this could have been me. I'm an African American in America, and this could have been me who was shot. And Coates actually makes a strong point. It was actually that point where Americans, many American voters, would say, hey, wait a sec, the president is black. The article is called "Fear of a Black President," and we begin to see this. That was really the moment where we began to see the rise of things like the Tea Party and all of these right-wing entryist organizations and this entryist movement. This idea that, the state had worked for white Americans throughout most of its history, and then all of a sudden, we have an African-American president who represents a shift. Now, the shift had happened before. I mean, this is, part of a long process. And this is one of the things that, I think we need to recognize about American history. This is something that goes back a long, long way. But in many ways, it was really that moment that it sort of entered into public consciousness. It's,
But the racism has always been the thread, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm saying that as a smug Canadian. Racism has always been the thread in American politics. All men are created equal. All white men are.
Well, Matthew makes no bones about it in the article. It's about white supremacy, Matthew.
Well, it is about white supremacy. I mean, we often forget the fact, and we shouldn't, that American society was, the American political culture was founded by a bunch of rich white guys together in Philadelphia. I mean, there was some debate. I mean, this is in the record about does all men created equal apply to to people of African descent or to other people or whatever. You know, Jews, Catholics, you know, the
Women.
list, women. I mean, and of course, no. You know, and I think we have to make a distinction between, you know, how we understand, you know, how societies work, American society, and honestly, it's not like there's no racism in Canada. But we have to make a distinction between how we understand the social order versus the body politic. You know, who are the people within the social order who are organizing themselves as a polis, as the political force. And throughout American history, that has been primarily white people. Now it's changed. You know, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment recognized the citizenship of people of African descent. The 15th Amendment guaranteed rights for all. But those changes are always contested. And that argument is continuing today. We see this in the streets with the actions of the police, and you know how we can get someone like Mike Pence, who says, you know, America is not a racist society, you know, which is easy for a white guy to say, right?
Yeah. Well, we have people up here who are saying the same thing these days, Matthew, as we're going through this existential angst. There
So,
is no systemic racism in Quebec.
right.
Well,
So
Right.
Trump is what the environmentalists would call it. Like he's a carbon sink, right? It all goes through, and it doesn't matter what it is. He's like one of those flying guys in front of a used car lot under a fan,
Oh
right? It
yeah.
doesn't really matter what he
It,
does or
and
says,
it doesn't matter if it's him. I
right?
mean, this is, you know, the thing. It's not Trumpism. It's something deeper. It's a more profound sort of movement of grievance and dissatisfaction in America. They've just focused it on him, and here's the danger when we focus on Trump as, you know, whatever scandal is going to get rid of him, we're going to defeat him in the election, you know, God willing. Um, but you know, all of these things, you know, that's great, but it's not like this mass of the of Americans is finally going to go, okay, well that's it, you know, we're going home now. They're not going to go home.
it's all there. Yeah.
And this is going to go on. I mean, one of the things that when you look at American history, you look at any history, but in American history in particular, one of the things that you'll notice is that there are these generational cycles in history, right? Where there are sort of dominant ideas and there are dominant themes in history, you know, call them ideological, dominant ideologies, hegemony, if you will, for a big word. And, you know, in the 1960s, you know, when President Johnson says, you know, okay, we're going to spend a whole lot of money defeating poverty. We're going to do all these things, expand social programs. We're going to the PBS and the NEA and the NEH, all of this stuff. Americans said, yeah, let's do that. And there was this sort of broad consensus of, you know, this liberal consensus that America was going to be a liberal society that was going to pursue these liberal goals. And that changes in the late 70s. You know, there are economic reasons for this, a collapse of the American economy in the 1970s, the global economies, whatever, you know, Iran, a failure in Vietnam. All of these things, you know, sort of come to a head at the end of the 1970s. And we have a new president, Ronald Reagan, who says, you know, it's a new day, America. You know, it's all about you. We see a shift at that point. It's not, you know, it's subtle at first, and it picks up steam, where Americans start talking about their political culture in profoundly conservative terms. You know, I got mine, right? You know,
Yeah. I'm all right, Jack.
exactly. And the contract with America, if you read that, the contract in America is basically a bill to people who have position and privilege and wealth in American society that says, and this is 1992, that says, you know, okay, this is what we are going to deliver for you. And so there's this profound shift in American society at that point. And I think that's what we're reaping now. This has become, in many ways, on one hand, the dominant faith of, you know, the people who always benefited from it. And at the same time, they feel threatened by the fact that that position itself is being changed. You know,
But would you not concur then? Because as Yvan says, he's this sinkhole where
oh,
everything is going in, and he is definitely a product of it. It is, as you
oh,
say,
absolutely.
not Trumpism, but the man is still making things even worse.
Oh yeah.
I don't think we can just make them almost benign in that
Oh, there
sense,
is
right?
nothing benign of him, and I would actually, rather than sinkhole, I would describe him as another word that starts with S and ends with hole. But you know,
Okay.
that's
But
We all
again,
know what we mean. Excellent.
exactly.
but,
But I know
but
I.
I'm sorry, if you take Trump out of the way, will Americans take Trump out of the way in November, by the way?
Oh, I hope so. Uh, I mean, that is the frightening thing, is that he won with 46% of the vote, and his approval ratings stand between 38 and 44%. So at this point, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I hope so. I'm not terribly excited by Joe Biden. He is not the most thrilling political leader that I have ever seen. He's got significant weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Um, but I hope we can mobilize a vote around him. I mean, I think he would give us a breath. And here's the thing, you know, I'm really not optimistic about American history at all.
Well,
You
I'd like to
probably
get
get that.
to your experiences as a teacher in a second, but please
Hmm.
continue.
But you know, my sense of Biden is that he might give us a pause, a break, a chance to catch our breath and um, regroup. But it's not going to roll back this movement that Trump is the sinkhole for, right? I mean, basically the fight's going to go on, and I hope I live long enough to see the end of it.
Yeah, that's as optimistic as we can be.
Yeah, I know.
As a teacher now, Matthew, my goodness, you are considered to be left wing. Is that how your students see you? How your employers see you as well? You actually, in American terms, you're more of a pinko, aren't you? You're way off there, off
Oh,
the
I'm way
chart.
off there.
Yeah.
I'm a Canadian, therefore I must be a pinko, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I always come out to my students, you know, the first day of class, right? It's like, I want you to know I'm a Canadian. It's like there's this gasp, um,
It's like
which
something
is
at a South Park.
it strangely is, and I talk out the side of my head, right? But you know, I mean, I am. But I mean, that's not an unusual position to be in. Certainly, teaching the humanities. I mean, there are not a lot of right-wing conservative intellectuals in the academy, which of course is one of the reasons why conservatives hate universities so much, right?
Yeah.
They're convinced that they're going to send their kids to Rutgers. Some people call it Red Rutgers, right?
Okay.
But you know, they send people to Rutgers, but or Columbia or the University of Illinois or whatever. It doesn't really matter, and they're going to be tainted with these left-wing ideas. I mean, what they don't know is their kids already have these left-wing ideas. I mean, this is one of the things
Yeah.
that I find fascinating is the Zoomers come in and the Millennials come in, and you know, they're all the critiques of gender and power and whatnot that we take, you know, that people of our generation see as something new is that's, you know, that's their lives. But yeah, I guess I am. It's not a problem for my employer. I mean, Rutgers is, like I said, I mean, honestly, I am probably not the most radical person you can find at Rutgers.
No, you
My
sound like a Canadian, and
Yep.
you're not teaching at the University of Chicago, so you know there's no problem there.
well, exactly, you know,
Economics, you know.
and we're all over the place, right? But you know, so I mean, that's the thing. But the thing that I find interesting about my students, and I've been lucky enough that I've taught in institutions like Rutgers or the University of Illinois in Chicago, where the students come from an extremely diverse backgrounds. There are, you know, at Rutgers Newark, there are no majorities, and I would say, you know, my students are Muslim, they're African American, they're Hispanic. They come from a variety of economic backgrounds, mostly, you know, lower middle class and working class kids. And so for the most part, they're pretty receptive to this. I mean, it's, you know, it's not like I'm going to stand up in front of the class and say, you know, America is founded on basic a racist premises. And it's like, oh, gasp. I have had friends who've taught in the South where that's happened, and that's another thing entirely. It's more like, yeah, nah, that makes sense to us. Tell us
Yeah.
more.
Okay.
You know, I
And
actually kind of
it's funny, Matthew. You mentioned that this is not going to go away
no.
if and when Trump goes away because it's been there since time immemorial, and these kids are going to either surprise the hell out of their parents or they already are
Oh, they
surprising
already
their
are.
parents. Yeah,
Oh, they already are.
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing to see it when they talk about it. What I find interesting is they also talk about how not only are they surprising their parents, but they are engaging with their parents and bringing them around. This is where there is hope. I mean, I'm not a complete pessimist. I'm all pretty pessimistic, but there is hope in the sense that these younger generation first of all, is going to be in a position where they are going to sweep to political power. I mean, we've already seen it with, the Squad, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and that group, who are young millennials, not even old enough to run for president yet. But behind them coming up are even more engaged, more motivated people who believe that things like traditional structures of authority and privilege are, well, basically BS. And so that's where the hope is. And I mean, I hope I live long enough. I'm going to, eat well and, continue to exercise so I can see it. But,
Well,
and
that commute from Boston to Newark probably doesn't help. I can't believe it. How many times do you drive that?
I don't drive it. Actually, I take the bus, mostly because driving that is insane, and coming back is bizarre. I mean, I'll be honest with you. The pandemic has helped since we
Okay.
moved everything
Yeah.
online.
Nobody next to you in the bus, or
Well, I would just cough.
okay.
Yeah.
It works. Like,
Or just tell them you're Canadian.
yeah, and having said that, it's a great. This is New England. You have no idea how many of us there are here.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So what took you to Rutgers? What took you to the U.S. from your cushy little existence here and diving into the lion's mouth here?
Well, first of all, let me say I think about going home like 3 or 4 times a day. So
Oh, okay.
you should know this. Well, I was a journalist. I was teaching at. I was also teaching journalism at Concordia University, and my interests became very much. I mean, I became very interested in sort of getting deeper into the stories, and this is something that many journalists, like you guys, are certainly conscious of, is that as a journalist, you work on a story, you file it by deadline and work on to the next one, right? And the old story is you're only as good as your last trick. And that's what it is. And I kind of wanted to live with stuff. I wanted to get deeper into these questions of, political culture and how things change and how people develop their ideologies and what they do. And so I decided, what the hell, I'm going to go get myself a PhD. And so I did. I went to the States and got a PhD, and 15 years ago. I've been here for 15 years now. And that's what brought me to the South. And since then, I mean, I've been teaching at a number of different institutions over the years. And that's kind of how I got here. In journalism, we always say that, the news is the first draft of history, or it's history on the run, and all of that. And I think that's very true, mostly because many of my sources are newspaper and media sources in my research. But I think there is a value for sort of the longer part of it as well. And there's also a value in in education, in being an educator. And we're sort of dancing around this, and when we talk about my teaching, the only way that we get to defeat something as vile and narrow-minded and frankly stupid as the movement around Trump is by helping people develop the critical skills to understand how this stuff fits into history, to understand things like white privilege and white supremacy and all of these things. And so, I mean, I think, now I sound like one of those activists, radical profs, but I mean,
Oh, this is what Shirley Steinberg was saying too.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the point. This is what we have to do. And so, I mean, in some ways, like, journalism, it's kind of a lousy job. I mean, the pay is lousy and the hours are terrible. I mean, you guys both, what the hours are like. But on the other hand, it's also one of the most gratifying things that I've ever done in my life. When I do get a student, who comes to me at the end of a course and says, I never really thought about that way, and then thank you very
Oh,
much.
that must be great. Yeah.
Oh, I get a student who goes to graduate school. I have one student who's at a who's studying, I don't know if she's finished now, I should check, but who's studying a public policy at George Washington University. I mean, these things are, what we must do. And look, if you got to do something in your life, right? It beats.
That's what I always say.
Honestly, and it beats the hell out of.
You're a driven man.
I am a driven man. I mean, it beats the hell out of moving boxes or hitting a ball with a bat, right? I mean,
it's true. We could be digging ditches. It's true.
There we go.
But you were saying, Matthew, that you think about quote unquote coming home a few times a day. Is that age creeping up on you, or is it a are there kids in tow? Is there a family? Is there
Well, I have 2 cats.
Okay.
No, my spouse is from Buffalo, and so she grew up.
Buffalo's a good town,
right across the border from America, watching the CBC, literally watching the CBC, and all of these things. And so it's something that she's certainly comfortable with. I mean, part of it's age. I mean, I don't want to die here, and God knows the health system here. I don't want to hasten my dying.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, the other problem is and many Canadians who live in the United States for a significant period of time do begin to notice the differences. I mean, we've watched these people on television our whole lives, right? But after a while, it's a little bit like being in a Twilight Zone episode where everything looks sort of familiar, but there's something not quite right. And that's what I feel. And I'm thinking, I mean, the other thing too, to be honest, aside from New York bagels in America suck.
Well, and come on home, for God's sake.
I know, exactly.
It's finally been said now.
I mean, seriously. It's the honest truth. When I was living in Chicago, people would say, yeah, there are 2 bagel places where you can get decent bagels. And it's true. They're in Skokie. And so when I was living in Chicago, we had to take a 2-hour train to get bagels.
This is in Chicago. 2 places?
It's exactly 2 places. I mean, we're not even in Chicago itself, in Skokie. So, I mean, that's part of it. But I mean, for whatever reason, what are the history, the political system, the parliamentary system where, we don't have a figure like the president, where, I mean, Canadians have problems, but, much of the time we're willing to, I think, interrogate some of those problems in ways that many Americans aren't. I mean, I'm not talking about, La Muette. They don't care. But, most Canadians are willing to at least think about it. That's what I miss. I miss that kind of willingness to engage in critique and self-critique. And I think part of it, and this is oddly, as I've gotten older and grayer, I think partly, that's because Canada has never been one thing. It could never possibly be one thing. It's the fragments of cultures.
Yep.
And so we've had this conversation forever. Remember back in the 70s, people are always talking about, what is trying to define the Canadian identity. I mean, that was a whole thing in the 1970s. People were, oh God, there was a TV show I remember very, very young. Here come the 70s. I thought that was probably
CTV.
on
CTV. Yeah. Oh, I remember it very well. It was very, very imaginative.
Yeah. And of course,
these
cars. Flying cars. But they were also talking about cultural issues. And one of the things I think Canadians have never actually settled down on is what is Canadian identity. And I think that's our strength. Because we can't think of ourselves as one thing, because, this constant discussion about Quebec nationalism, which is, I have my issues with Quebec nationalism, certainly as it exists today, but even the whole regional nature of Canada is something that we are talking about all the time. So it's something which is a constant negotiation, which means it's fluid and it's constantly changing. So we can't point to someone and say, he's a Canadian. That is exactly what we mean by Canadian.
It's interesting. We thought about, when you mentioned Here Come the 70s and all the stuff we did talk about Canadian culture, and we thought we were being swamped by American culture, right? All 3 of us watched U.S. television when we were growing up.
And there was
yet
really lousy
you-
Canadian sitcoms.
Oh, yeah. I mean, The King of Kensington. God.
Coming Up, Rosie.
come
I
on.
mean,
Oh, Al, come on. You got to give Al Waxman.
No, but Matthew makes a
props
good
there.
point. You know you're not being swamped by American culture when you live there.
right.
You
know-
you know you're a Canadian.
But it's funny, and I write a lot on Jewish issues, as I'm sure you notice if you've taken a look at anything I've written, and it's a little bit, being in America as a Canadian is a little bit like being in America or elsewhere as Jewish. It's like you're always conscious of
something.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And it's something I was always conscious of
Pretty bad.
in
Robocall.
Quebec. Love those. But it's something I was always conscious of Quebec and came up during the whole laïcité issue, is that, and many of my Quebecois friends didn't recognize this, but there's a cross on the flag.
Mm-hmm.
And the fleur de lis is a symbol of the Trinity. I mean, now, of course, that's something that you don't think of, when, I mean, the fish doesn't notice the water, right? But, when you're, I don't know, what am I, a salamander? The salamander does. And that's the kind of the situation in the States, is that I thought I knew America until I lived here.
Okay.
And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of America that I love. It
is a spectacular civilization in many, many, many ways.
Absolutely. But, at the same time, there are things that I hadn't expected. And this moment that we're living in America, and American, my Canadian friends are watching it like it's a dumpster fire. Some of them, you have popcorn. But, this moment that we're living in seems from the outside to be unprecedented or unparalleled in some way. From the inside, I don't know how we couldn't have expected it. And that's the thing, and like I said, it worries me. I think, I don't know.
Yeah, it brings us right back to the beginning here. It's not about Trump. It's about the evolution or the devolution of a society.
Yeah, and this happens. I mean, historically, we see this. It happens to every civilization, every society over time. This in some ways is predicated on and accelerated by the economic decline of the United States. I mean, still the wealthiest country in the world, but it's the wealthiest country in the world the way Great Britain was the world's greatest empire in 1933, right?
Yeah.
Not for long. And so I mean that's certainly part of it. I hope Americans get their business together. I think they can. There is so much worth celebrating in the United States. From its history of the resistance to white supremacy, but also its culture. I mean, we still watch American television. I mean, Schitt's Creek will only get you so far, right? I mean, it gets you pretty far, but it'll only get you. I love it. I mean, we watch it. We call them our Canadian friends, them and Kim's Convenience. But so there is a lot here worth saving and worth preserving. Having said that, American global preeminence, American leadership, as the beacon upon the hill, which is basically was institutionalized after 1945. I think, I think that ship has sailed. I think we are on the cusp of a new global organization and a new sort of global political culture, broadly construed. And I don't know where that's going to be. I mean, I'm not a prophet, I'm a historian. So,
Things are happening fast.
Matthew.
Well, listen, happy Canada Day for yesterday.
Yes.
And
And
have
happy
a glorious
4th of July.
4th.
Yes,
Oh, absolutely. We made homemade poutine yesterday, so it was yes.
You are American.
Homemade poutine and veggie steamé. But thank you guys.
Matthew, you've been most generous, and this has been
Wonderful.
very enlightening, and I appreciate your time very much. Thank you. The both of us do.
Well, thank you guys, and it's great to see you both again.
Take care.
Thank you.
I don't
And
even remember me,
be-
but
Oh, yes.
Well, yeah. No, but be safe, be well.
Yeah.
Keep teaching.
okay.
Enjoy your
Good at
weekend,
it.
Matthew. Thank you, and we'll
Thank
keep
you.
people apprised of the new postings. Oh, and you're working on a new book as well, and
Mhm.
is that soon to come out, or are we still
Well, I'm
researching?
flogging. I'm researching now, and I'm sort
Okay.
of in the flog process. But you know how it goes.
Okay.
I'll definitely keep you posted on that.
Appreciate it. Thank you,
That'd be great.
Matthew. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Have a
you.
good summer.
Bye.
Bye bye.
That was wonderful.
That really wraps up, I think, our conversation about this country and the U.S. and all that very nicely for this week.
Well,
That
having
was
talked to
very
Matthew
enlightening.
and then Shirley
Surely.
and Caitlin in New York,
Yep.
I just it's as you say, we all brought up on American television, and then you go down there and you realize I'm not an American.
No, and it's interesting.
It really sets in. You do
Yes,
see
so we have
differences.
Americans here and Canadians there, and I'm pleased to say that in my little shriveled brain, they're kind of confirming what I always thought, and that is, and I take away from our little chat with Matthew here that there is room to grow somewhere at the end of this
Yeah.
tube. So
You like the King of Kensington?
hey, listen, I'll defend Al Waxman. I liked him.
Oh, I loved Al Waxman. He was
Sure.
a great character. He was on
Yeah.
a lot of American television shows,
That's
usually
right.
playing a cop.
Yeah. So
But,
Al's been gone for a long time now. So
Yeah, I interviewed him.
did you? Was he a nice man? Was he a
really-
nice man?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, good.
I was hoping, and he turned out to be a nice guy.
Okay, because that's
And
we've
I
we've
thought, I could.
we've
I wanted
interviewed
to- they wanted to do
celebrities
something.
over the years, and some of them show up like they don't want to be there, and others show up
Yeah.
and they show up.
They-
So
Yeah,
Yeah.
and some surprise you in good ways, some surprise you in not so good ways, and we'll just leave it at that.
and we'll talk about celebrities tomorrow for our last installment.
Yeah, a
for
couple of good
couple
ones,
weeks.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And I've been
Alrighty.
watching. I'm gonna sing some Dionne Warwick for you tomorrow.
Wait a minute, have we lost Dion?
No. She's actually she's 79, and she's
God
got a
love her.
gig. She's got a gig in Vegas.
Good God!
Yeah, and the only
She
reason I
didn't
know all of
do
this is that
astrology shows on television after
that's
a while?
right. I
She
was
went a little
what I'm
bit,
watching is I'm watching another music documentary on Netflix about what's his name, Clive Davis, who was the big music mogul for Columbia and Arista, and he brought all these artists together. So and I've been singing
Burt Bacharach songs.
Burt Bacharach songs for 3 days.
Hal David. Oh, jeez. Yeah. You sing on your own though, right? You don't.
No,
have to share
I'm
it with
I'm
anyone.
gonna tomorrow. I will regale you with the full 4 minute and 59 seconds of I know I'll
you
never
know-
love this way again.
Yeah, well, I've often felt that, and it's disturbing.
Okay, Adam.
Adam, take it easy.